Hey everyone, welcome back to the On Adventure podcast. I'm Josh Self, and I'll be your host today. Today's guest is Tanner Critz. Tanner is a longtime martial artist, an Appalachian Trail thru-hiker, a community builder, and someone who's no stranger to taking the hard road when it matters most. In this episode, Tanner opens up about 3 defining adventures in his life. One was hiking the entire Appalachian Trail. The second was building Unity martial arts from the ground up and keeping it going through the COVID-19 pandemic. And then also surviving his own near-fatal battle with COVID-19. But this isn't just about endurance or survival, it's really about identity. It's about stripping life down to the essentials and asking, who am I, really? Tanner's reflections on risk, growth, fear, and transformation hit deep. This episode is very raw, reflective, and quietly powerful at different moments, and it might just change the way that you think about your own journey. So let's dive in. Well, Tanner Critz, welcome to the On Adventure podcast. This will be our start, and we've already gotten into some good part of the conversation. This is the first time you and I have met, although our histories have intersected many times with your overlap with my wife's family in Little Rock. So that may come up, and I'm sure they'd love to hear any stories that you remember, but I appreciate you doing this on a Friday morning, and I'm really interested to see where we go with it.
Absolutely. No, thanks for having me on.
Well, let's talk a little bit about so again, a podcast on adventure. Adventure in your adult life generally stems from a starting point. Sometimes it's in childhood, sometimes it's in young adulthood that the seeds get planted. But what was it for you? Where do you remember the idea of doing something hard and challenging and getting a reward from that? Do you have a memory of when that sunk in, that was a real thing in your life?
Yeah. And it's, one of the fun things about aging is that you continue to gain greater perspective on these events, right? The framework, the first time you go through one of these feels like you're so spontaneous, right? Like I had felt the call of adventure. And then the second time, you realize there was something else going on. There's a larger sort of sea change that you're responding to by needing to break out of whatever shell you're in, whatever identity crisis or financial crisis or cultural crisis, like something's going on that you need to break with. And it needs a hard stop to reset. And in that resetting, you want to have information about, who am I really? I mean, that's the biggest question that I hear people asking of an adventure is, who am I? I wasn't Jewish. I remember my Jewish friends having their bar mitzvah, where you say you are now a man, you go through some difficult challenges, you have to do some rituals, and then your rights change and your obligations change, and there's this sort of weight of change. I didn't, I went to middle school. There wasn't a ritual. There wasn't a moment where I said, now you're an adult, your rights are changing, your responsibilities are changing. And so a defining event was really missing. And so, if you had the life of every middle school, elementary school, high school kid in the US, almost everyone passes the 10th grade. Almost everyone passes the 11th grade. Some people have better grades, and we can call that a rite of passage, but if everyone gets through, who cares, right? Mm-hmm. We haven't defined ourselves. So something that really tests you, lets you know better who you are, lets you know what are the real tools, what are the made-up stories, who am I underneath all this? So all that to say, when I first hiked the Appalachian Trail, I thought it was because I saw this book at Lennox. And I saw this book, never been backpacking in my life. I like the woods, but I decided I have to do this. But I'm in high school. I don't have any way to do that. So I moved to Arkansas a year or two later, it's on my mind, but it's kind of floating in the back. And then at some point in the first year of college, I realized I think I could do this. I think I could even wrap part of my college credits into doing it. I just have to cordon this time off. And then I just became very dogged about I'm doing this at this time and I'm not going to let anything else happen at that time. Then I go on this adventure. It's amazing. It's transforming in many ways. I learn a lot about myself. I come back, I write about it. Years later, when I rewrite it to publish it, the editor had some questions. Why didn't you do this, this, and this? And I realized there was a whole section that I never thought about while I was on the Appalachian Trail, and B, never told any of the people that I was on the Appalachian Trail with, which is outstanding because I told them everything. We literally just hung out and chatted 12 hours a day for 6 months. I mean, at 22 years old, there's not a lot you don't cover. So the fact that I would omit a really important life-threatening issue from all those conversations means something's going on in my head that I am consciously repressing, right? But it had just never occurred to me. And so I tried to figure out how to put that into the published version of the book. And you said that you got to read it. I don't know if you read the one I wrote after high school that some family members got a hold of. So that might be the one, or the one that was published.
Yeah, this would have been like right after probably early 2000s.
It might have been the published one. I think that one was more like 2010, 2009.
No, it was well before that.
Okay, so you got the college version.
So so you've piqued my interest, and if you're willing to share what it was that you left out.
My first year of college, I was doing karate all the time. I was competing full contact. I was just doing it all the time. I showed up for the first day of my scholarship with a huge concussion and a bruise that wrapped all around my head. And so one day when I'm in class and my stomach is just killing me, I felt like I was bruised in my stomach. And I went to the nurse and I was like, it's killing me right here. I'm doubled over in pain. And she gives me a bunch of ibuprofen or Advil or something. And it opens a bleeding ulcer in my stomach because I was having an ulcer. So I don't know what that looks like. I don't know what it means when your stools are jet black. And, I don't know, maybe I had too much chocolate or something. And so it goes on for a couple of weeks of me bleeding internally until I go to a tournament and pass out in the middle of doing karate at this tournament. And they take me directly to the hospital and they're like, dude, you were inches from death. You were so low on blood and then you were exerting yourself. Wow. And so, I get better.
But so was this from an injury doing karate?
No, I didn't know. They asked if I was overstressed, and I was like, I'm not overstressed. I'm like healthy and young and having a good time in college.
Where were you in school?
This is at UALR here in Little Rock.
UALR, okay.
Yeah. And so I went on with my life. 2 years later, it happened again.
Oh my gosh.
And what they discovered over time, like if you look back on it, was that I had an infection, H. pylori, which apparently I'm vulnerable to. And back then, they just thought ulcers are stress. Mm-hmm. And so by the third time it happened, and for timeline's sake, freshman year of college is the first one, right? Right before I hike the Appalachian Trail, it happens again. Then I hike the Appalachian Trail and never once mentioned any of these guys that, oh, by the way, I've almost bled out twice. If it happens here in the woods, I'm probably going to die right in front of you because you guys are going to try to carry me to a road to hitchhike to a hospital, but I've literally got a few hours before I bleed to death.
That never occurred to you to share that with him?
Well, that's a good question, right? Did it never occur to me, or was it something I was so angry about?
I see.
My young, healthy body betraying me that I was not willing to let it be part of this reality, right? So if you ask yourself, why did I go hike the Appalachian Trail? One of the questions is, am I proving to myself that I'm strong enough, right? Yeah. Have I been given some evidence that this body isn't good enough? Mm-hmm. And I want to go prove that that's not true. And I'm not really willing to talk about weakness to anybody out there, even though I'm willing to tell them every other way that I'm weak and foolish and human. But I'm not going to talk about the one that you might have to act on at a moment's notice, even though at one point on the trail, I thought it was starting. And I got to a phone, and I got some stuff. Like I started getting to a hospital when I realized it wasn't the thing, and I still didn't tell them. Which means to me, 10 years later, looking back on it, that was a big part of what I was doing. By the time, I couldn't have told you that's what I was doing. Right.
What was it, out of embarrassment or just, hold my beer and watch this? I'm going to prove that this isn't
No,
going to stop
I
me.
think it was a third thing, because I think it was closer to embarrassment than hold my beer, but I think it was more like I just didn't want that to be reality. I
Yeah.
just
Okay.
didn't want that to be who I was, and I was on this adventure where you change your name and nobody knows you, and you figure out who you are. And I didn't want that to be it. Right? I really wanted struggle and resourcefulness and humor and all that to be who I was, but not weakness and bleeding for no reason, and your body's probably going to kill you and nobody really knows why. I just didn't want that. I wanted to be
Yeah.
strong and young.
Yeah.
So
And
I
the
think I
time
just
that,
wasn't willing to tell that story.
the little bit of time that I've spent on trail with other people that are, doing that at the same time, like that is an allure of being out there, a pull to detach from the reality that we're coming from and make something
Absolutely.
else up. And
Yeah.
so that does not surprise me that you would have disconnected from that.
And interestingly, I don't think I could have told you as I left to do the Appalachian Trail, I don't think I could have told you that that was even one of the benefits. I just needed to go do this hard thing that what did I know about it? 10% of people succeed. That's what I knew. This is really hard. Most
Hmm.
people can't do it. And so I think that was this thing I put myself out there for. And I tried to get friends to come, and thank goodness nobody could, because I think it was really, really important that I be completely alone. And I mentioned in the book, I think the great transformation that came over me was because I got to completely wipe the slate and ask myself, what of these things are me?
Hmm.
What of these things are my actual self, my actual reaction, as opposed to what a complex web of relationships expects of me based on past experiences, right? If I've got a friend who is with me all the time, and whenever he says X, I respond with this, Monty Python quote or whatever,
Hmm.
in a
Hmm.
sense, I'm in a social obligation to tell this Monty Python joke for the rest of my life.
Yep.
Right. And then, it just extrapolates out to a million things. And so at some point, you realize I'm not exploring my true nature. I'm maintaining relationships that I don't want to lose. And so the virtue of letting yourself go completely naked into the wilderness is figuring out, while you're out there, what was I carrying and what is actually me that carries it. And that was the power. And then the nice thing about a 6.5 month hike is you figure that out in 2 months, 3 months, and then
Mm.
you get 3 months more to practice it before you have to go back to those relationships that want you to just rubber band right back to where you were and fulfill those same roles again. So you get to really practice and say, no, this is me. And in reference to the idea of why go on adventures, being able to say with true conviction, no, I know myself, is the cherry on top, or not the cherry on top, it's the golden ring that you're looking for.
Yeah.
Is I am confronted with something really complex that really tests the human soul, and I know the answer immediately. Not I have to ask myself, what about this? What about that? What would this person say? What would that person say? Because you're just navigating all the relationships, and trying to decide what those relationships will think of your decision, instead of I know myself. I
Hmm.
have faced the dragon and I won. And these are the tools I use to do it. Therefore, you don't get to tell me what works. I know, I was there. And so that conviction, I think, is the ultimate goal of adventure.
Is there, in your opinion, any other way to get to that than through struggle and suffering?
I don't think it's always suffering, but I do think it is always struggle. And I think it is always fear and risk. And I and I think you can construct it in a lot of different ways. But I think that there are elements of it that are really pivotal to making it be effective. So, for instance, if I did something challenging on a weekend retreat and a bunch of other people did it in a bunch of different ways, I would feel like I had a hint of a notion about something that might work. But if I go and people try lots of different things and fail and there's tragedy and my way pushes through despite all that and I have success, I have a much stronger sense of myself being, that those lessons are real, that those
Mhm.
lessons are valuable and powerful, and that I've sort of come away with, a mighty token that I can apply. If I go, this is why, you know, graduating with honors from high school. Okay, you did better than most of the other people in high school, but they all made it through, and you got to wear this special tassel, but you don't really have a lot to bring from that besides I'm really good at doing homework.
Mhm.
And so when you do something, if you were to go there and you were one of two people that graduated high school, you would have a much better feeling of like these things that I tried worked and the things that other people tried did not work. And I can really trust those things, you know.
Yeah. So you kind of alluded to this a minute ago. At 22, when you decided to step foot on the Appalachian Trail, was it a conscious decision to pursue this understanding of yourself, or what exactly was it that took you to leave your reality at the time and go walk 2,200 miles?
When I did it, I would tell you I just felt called to do it. By the time I was in my 30s, I would tell you that I needed something to define myself with. And that was the only thing I had seen really that would do that. Now, in light of my most recent adventure, I would tell you that my that I had died and that I was trying to define who I had to be in this next life. That in a sense that those two bleeding ulcers had killed the person that I thought I was,
Oh, I see.
and that I was trying to understand who am I now.
Was there grief or loss associated with that, or did it feel something different coming back to life on the trail?
Coming coming back to life, I see what you're saying. The As far as grief, I think that if you looked at like my time in Arkansas between moving there and starting college and then hiking on the Appalachian Trail, it wasn't grief. It was a disconnection. There were just it was like all the plugs had come unplugged, and there was clearly a lot of energy there. I just couldn't figure out where it went. What does it do? My curse in my life is being kind of good at everything, which in college is a nightmare. Like, what am I supposed to study? You guys all want me to pick a thing. Should I go to med school? Should I be a lawyer? Should I,
Hmm.
study humanities? Should I be an artist? Like, what am I going to do? I could do any of it. I don't know that I would be the best at any of it. Like, have this sort of, master of all things, or a jack of all trades, master of none kind of approach to college. So I end up just following my curiosity and end up studying what is consistently rated as the least financially supported major of all time, and study cultural anthropology, and because
Okay.
it's so interesting and there's cute girls that like hiking there, you know. So I was really just searching. I think I was lost. I think that at that point in my life, I knew I had a big old basket full of resources and I just couldn't figure out where any of it plugged in.
Mm.
And so I went to the woods.
So you've got multiple adventures in your life that you highlighted to me before we got started here. But before we kind of dive into those other things, talk to me a little bit about what the experience was like on trail with the people that you're around. And were there any moments where you regretted being out there? Like something went off the rails, or you just, kind of a dark night of the soul and what am I doing? So talk to me a little bit about the experience of doing that thing.
Yeah. When I talk to people about if they want to hike the Appalachian Trail, one of the things that I go over is that there are several challenges there. It's not just hiking. So one of the big challenge is the physical, both feet, but also entropy. So it's not just that it's hard to hike that far. It's also it's a buildup, right? Your bones are taking this impact over a long period of time. Your toes might be wearing down. The straps from the backpack might be chewing at your hip. Like over time, things build up, and so there's the difficulty of hiking, and then there's the difficulty of hiking for months and months and months. But that's just one thing. If you were really good at that, that doesn't mean you're going to succeed, because you also have to enjoy camping. Like you have to enjoy that you only have limited stuff that you carried with you, that everything's dirty and wet, and that you haven't showered in weeks. You got to be comfortable being very, very dirty. And, for it being a real challenge to keep some socks that aren't just disgusting, and, to wash yourself off a little bit. So that can wear somebody down on its own. And then you have to enjoy the social isolation. There's this deep, deep isolation. If you hike with a group of friends the whole time, that's a lot less. But you as a group are isolated. And if you hike alone, there's a deep, deep isolation there.
Did you do both?
What's that?
Did you do both?
I did both.
Hike,
Yeah.
yeah, hike alone
And
and
I
with a
think
group.
people now probably are less isolated. I see
Yeah.
people blogging and video blogging while they're hiking. So I think that's probably less of a thing now. Though I would recommend anyone who does it to isolate themselves enough that they can get away from the relationships. I mean, I think that's the thing that you're trying to accomplish. And I can speak more to that from this third adventure, which really digs into why those relationships are destructive is the wrong word, but they're not going to help you know yourself. And so those are the three big challenges, right? It's the physical challenge, then it's just sort of the cleanliness and living challenge, and then it's the mental isolation challenge. And so I was fine with all of those.
You are.
And because of that, barring tragedy, there really wasn't anything to get me down. I really liked the physical challenge. Like I had been doing karate for a long time. My feet were already really tough. And so it was mostly like backpack discomfort and soreness, but your body after about 3 weeks just changes gears, and your metabolism. I'm sure that there's a doctor somewhere who could explain this really well, but your metabolism changes, right? I switched on one day at the end of the Great Smoky Mountain National Park. I switched from a 2,500 calorie diet to a 6,000 calorie diet that day, and just ate the rest of my food. I wasn't even thinking about it. I just finished all my food, and then I had 2 days of food missing that I had to figure out how to make up for, and pretty much ate at that rate for the rest of the Appalachian Trail. But also on that day, I quit being sore. Not totally, but that whole waking up and feeling like I was breaking out of this chrysalis every morning and trying to get each joint to start moving again, that stopped. I woke up ready to go hiking. And so I've always looked at that and thought my body was just like, fine, you're not going to give up. So we'll change modes and start doing this.
That's interesting. I've heard people say that getting your trail legs is that 2 to 3 week
Yeah,
time period, and it's
absolutely.
an immediate switch, which for me that's never done that before, and just doing section hikings over a 3 or 4 day period, that's tough because like you're
Yeah,
just starting to get into a groove, and it's like, okay, time to go home.
right,
And so
right.
one of these days I'll carve out more time and try to see what that's like. But so anyway, you hit the pivot point in the Great Smoky Mountains. I'm assuming you were going northbound.
Yes,
Okay.
yes. And so I was completely alone at that time, and had been for some time.
Hmm.
And that had been really, really a powerful loneliness. Not loneliness in this pejorative, like I was so sad sense, but loneliness in that it really let me think. It really let me center myself. And so when at the end of that, I met some of the finest people I've ever met in my life, I was pretty raw. I was pretty raw as a human in terms of I had looked very, 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 very bluntly at my life, my relationships, who I was and what I was doing, with the exception apparently of the fact that I could die on the minute at any moment. That I was not willing to face.
Minor
but
detail.
Everything else, I was right there with it. And so I came into this relationship with these guys completely ready to sort of wade into who I really was. What are the things about me that are special? What are the things about me that are powerful? What works? What doesn't work? And not have any assumptions based on the past of what I might do, might say, should do, should say. And so you really get to find out what's comfortable. Just, you try saying something a certain way and you go, no, that's not me. Try it again. No, that's me. That's coming from my heart. And so that led to really, really knowing these people well.
Yeah. And to have that kind of self-exploratory and self-realization in your early 20s, that's a gift. Because I mean, some people don't ever get to that.
Mm-mm.
I think it took me a lot longer to get to a point of, truly being willing to take off the performance mask and be okay with, I am who I am, and these are the things that I like to do and don't like to do, and still it's a daily struggle, even though I feel a little more connected to that at this point. And so for you to have that in your early 20s to launch then into adulthood, like it really is a gift. But I hear people that I've interviewed several people that have thru hiked the AT, and almost all of them talk about this post trail, like a depression or a darkness that hits as they transition back into even what may be a new reality, but back into the real world. Was that an experience for you?
Absolutely. And I remember the last, and you had asked about the dark night of the soul, and I was going to say, my book has one chapter that's just the worst day. And I end up laughing with friends in that day. So the worst day I had was really bookended with, I have this amazing life experience. Like, I'm so lucky to be where I am, doing what I'm doing. Also, with blood running down my legs, and I'm injured and hurt and wet and tired and all this, but like, what an amazing thing to get to be alive. So I would say I didn't really have a dark night of the soul, but all through Maine, we all desperately didn't want to stop. And so we had a couple of the funny things about that. One was you were only allowed to say one thing about the end of the trail per day. And once you had said your one thing, but you weren't allowed to
don't bring it up again.
You can't bring it up again. And if you look north and just sighed whimsically, we would put a sleeping bag over your head, tackle you to the ground, and wrestle and beat on you until you just like were laughing and couldn't stop. And then we had all these punishments for like, you got to stop acting like the world is about to end. But we did sit there going like, okay, so if we spend 4 months saving money and then we go to Alaska, and then we hike from Alaska all the way south through Mexico, through South America, that would be 4 years of hiking. And then we can just keep this going. We can work along the way. It was that kind of discussion. Like, we can't just go back to life. Life is stupid. Like, this is real. And at the time, it felt just like I liked this more and I liked these guys and I didn't want to stop. I have a really different sense of it again since my more recent adventure. And when we talk more about that, I want to touch back on how that changed perspective. But I was living 100% in the moment. And it was just like tasting the richest of everything all the time.
Wow.
I mean, you're just in the woods. Your food is C- at best. But it was like living like a king and eating at a royal table every moment, because you were right on the edge of uncertainty all the time. You did not know where you were going to be tonight. You weren't sure that you were going to have food. You weren't sure that you were going to have shelter. And that's living on the edge just makes every moment so crisp and so real. I can smell it right now. And it's been 30 years this summer since I did it.
Wow.
That's the real draw. That's why it's so hard to just go back to like a refrigerator and a house with a roof. where you know what you're eating tonight. You know, you're like, I'm gonna shake it up and order pizza instead of this food that I was supposed to cook. Like, you know how hollow that is, and you know you're sort of breaking the rules, and that is hard to go back to.
Yeah, my buddy and I that hikes with me, we talk about this when we're out about there's something uniquely special about carrying everything that you own at that moment and need on your
Yeah,
back.
yeah.
That's it, and
And even more so, imagine if you didn't have that backpack. How much more in the moment you are, not even knowing
yeah.
what you will sleep under, not knowing what you're going to eat. How much more urgent is reality in that moment? But to single it down to one backpack full of stuff, from a house and a life and a network of
Mhm.
relationships, is going from 100 down to 5.
Yeah.
But 5 down to 0, suddenly you're talking about ascetic mystics
Mhm.
living on the razor's edge every moment, right? But that's kind of crazy.
Yeah,
Maybe
but
let's
you
put,
get
put
to
it
the
on our
5
backpack.
and you realize that there's still a draw for more. And
Oh, yeah,
so the mystics, they make way more sense, I think.
yeah.
And you
Because
can,
you always imagine those stories, and you're like, how could you not be miserable,
yes.
being dirty, sitting in the dirt, and hungry, and not knowing where you're going? But you get out in the woods with your backpack, and you start to go, okay,
Hmm.
I see.
Yeah, you're describing it, but I think for me, I've never felt more human and more alive when
Yeah,
those things are true in that
yeah.
moment. So,
Because and your whole job is helping people feel safe. Can
yeah.
I just feel safe? If there's enough money in this pile, I'm not afraid.
Hmm.
But in the deep, dark truth, you're still so afraid. And you don't know why, because the pile of money is big enough. If it's big enough, why am I still afraid? And the truth is that you're disconnected from your humanity. I mean, why do we go on an adventure? Because we know deep down there's this human desperately trying to get out, but we can't find them. And they're inside of us and we can't find them. So we
Hmm.
have to go hold ourselves over the fire for that person to come out. You
That
know?
is so good, man. That's awesome. So let's, you talked about the AT. You've mentioned to me you've had three major adventures in your life. AT is the first one.
Right.
Talk to me about the other two.
Yeah. So the AT was the one that told me, when you're there, you feel like you're very unique. But what it really showed me was you can connect to the power of your own humanity. You can find that. You have the ability to dig down and find that. And so a few years later, let's see, that was 1995. So you're 7 years after that when I lose my job, the towers fall, the world is suddenly in chaos, people are getting beheaded, and America as a group rallies in sorrow in a way that I've not really seen in my lifetime. And at that moment, as I'm grasping for, well, I'm making pretty good money designing websites for businesses, but I never dreamed of that. I never really wanted to do it. And suddenly the world has kind of called BS on it. They've said, like, all
Mm.
right, you're not that big a deal. Sure, you know how to make a website. I can also make one with this software that I bought for $90 off the shelf. And I sort of looked at it and felt there was a hollowness to it. And it also wasn't an incredibly valued position. I realized I was having to explain charges to people. Like, I don't want to have to explain my job. If you don't
Hmm.
want it, don't hire me for it. And I at the time was teaching martial arts, but not for a living, just as an honor. And nobody ever questioned why they should have to pay dues. They were thrilled to be there. And so I thought, if I can make that my life, I think that would be more meaningful. And I feel the power of these connections. And so my second adventure is deciding, having just had a baby and another on the way, that I would stop doing the thing that I knew could make a living and start doing a thing that I didn't know could make a living, but I knew could change people. I knew that I could have an effect on human beings, and that my personality and my talents and my abilities could change people's lives. And I didn't know how the money part would work, but I knew that that was real. And I just kind of followed that scent. The hurdle initially was that, the school that I taught martial arts at, no one worked there. Everybody was a volunteer. It was just a club. You couldn't go in and say, hey, can I just get a job here and teach? Because they would say, with what money? There's no, they literally would say, here's what we paid for rent for the space. This was electricity. This was how much we paid for repairing that thing. This is the water bill. Okay, that's this much. There's 65 members divided by, all right, you owe $27.50, right?
I see.
So there wasn't a budget for anything. And I had to figure something else out. So I started an after school program. I had not taught children much before. We mostly had teenagers and adults. There were a few kids, but I went to a school that I had gone to so that they trusted me and let me try an after school program. And I did a 12-week program, and about 8 weeks into it, I told my wife, this isn't going to work. These kids are the worst. They don't pay attention. They're disrespectful. I'm trying to show them something and they're spinning in circles. This is a terrible idea. And so I'm going to finish this 12 weeks and then I'm going to figure something else out to do with my life. And that week, I got 2 phone calls unprompted from parents saying, you're changing my kid's life. They're having a better life at home. They talk about their class with you all the time. It's making them do better at school. It's on and on and on. And I'm fighting the urge to go, your kid's the worst. They're a complete mess. They have no idea what I'm trying to show them. And instead, I felt that little voice and I just listened and let it ruminate and made this realization that kids are different than adults. You have no training in child psychology or anything like that.
Mm-hmm.
But it started that day saying, they don't know how to show you that they are excited about this. They show you they're excited about this by spinning in circles and running up and down and not stopping talking because they're so fired up about what we're doing. And then I added another school and another school and another school until there was a bunch of them and enough to make a living. And at some point realized we wanted to move back to Arkansas, which was very much a family decision about how much time was I getting to see my wife and kids and how much did it cost to be in Atlanta. And that meant we had to live way outside of where I was working, which meant I was in the car all the time and couldn't help and couldn't see people. And so we moved back here just for cost, and decided that when we did that, we would get a loan and open a brick and mortar school. And it was a huge risk. It had been risky to switch to teaching karate as it was, and then it had gone pretty well. But this was a whole different thing. No support network. No one in this town does this martial arts. Nobody's going to help me teach classes. And so it was very risky. And then we also did it in 2008. We got our loan in, I think the banker that gave me the loan said it was the last loan he gave because
before the crisis.
The crisis, right. So we borrow money and immediately start trying to set this thing up in a place where everybody's losing their jobs. And I just, I said to Melanie at the time, if we can make it through this, it means we're meant to do it. If we can't, this was just a bad choice. But, the worst case scenario is I go get a job that pays real money and we go from there. And I'm home at 5 every day. So, but I'm making it sound like that was an easy thing to say, but that was 3 years into blood, sweat, and tears that were.
That's pretty scary.
I remember one night just doing the math in my head, lying there in bed and going, I still owe $70,000 on this bank loan, and we're $70,000 into credit card debt, and we're, the payments for the mortgage, the lease, and the, electricity, and all these things are coming up, and there's not enough money in the bank to do any of that stuff. At what point do I just say it's done?
Mm-hmm.
Because I have this gift of being able to calculate out a long ways, and I could see how this graph was easing and was going to hit, around $5 before it started coming back up, that our whole life would come down to about $5, and that calculation was not enough for my wife. And I was like, I think it's not going to fail, but but I can't prove it to you because it's just this vision that I have. And so what I finally did as I'm laying there one night, knowing this math is not what she wants to hear, is saying, let me just use that same power of projection to look at it all failing. Let me just watch it all fail in my mind, see every block fall down and fall down and fall down. And then let's go ahead and walk through this darkness and see what's on the other side. So on the other side of that, I owe a mortgage worth of money to somebody, but I also have my free time. I start working a job that pays real money. All the students that really cared about learning martial arts are probably going to come hang out in my backyard and do this anyway. And I thought, that doesn't sound that bad. Like, I can handle that. And then just carried on from there with a good night's sleep. And it was about $5.
Did it really?
And then it started
Wow.
to curve out. And by 5 years in, I was able to pay myself, and it just got better and better.
Yeah, I mean, that's an interesting framework to be able to, detach enough from the scary situation to play the movie out in your head. Had you done that before? How did you know how to do that?
Well, I will tell you, and this is one of the reasons that my wife had a harder time with it, was the Appalachian Trail. Like, I knew at the bottom of my soul that naked and alone in the woods was pretty good. I knew that when everything gets stripped away, I'm not dead. I'm myself. I knew that when we lose everything, we just get closer. Our castle walls getting torn down is not the end of our lives. In many ways, it's the beginning. And so I didn't want it to all fall, but I knew that the worst case scenario was a really good life. And so that was the fearlessness that carried me forward.
Yeah.
That was why I could sleep. And so I have the Appalachian Trail to thank for that, because that was definitely the hard fought lesson there, hard won lesson there.
Yeah. I mean, nothing comes for free, but it's always cool to see the mile markers along the way in somebody's life that you couldn't have done that without the thing first, right? The AT had to happen.
Absolutely.
And so would you say the same about adventure number 3 that
the one thing I want to say about adventure number 2 before I move on from it is that it was, I mentioned not having Melanie's buy-in a lot of the way, but I also did. And the reason why she was on board and the reason why she would suck it up and go, all right, I'm behind you, was not because she's a dutiful wife and does whatever I say. It was because have always been 2 aspects to unity. There's been the business that's been required in order to have a building and, hold classes that way. But like I said, if that crumbled, I already had the model from Atlanta of just meeting with folks and where money didn't matter and doing, like, I already knew that's good too. We can make that work. But the thing that kept it going was what I alluded to in Atlanta. There's a second aspect of unity, which is where the riches are piled. This is where my overflowing safe is, and that is, it is community, right? It builds relationships and people like gangbusters. Like, I get to meet a kid who's 4 years old and their life is a mess. Like, their parents are thinking about getting divorced and they're switching schools, and I get to look at this kid who's bouncing off the walls and can't keep themselves straight, and they're getting kicked out of schools and they're having all sorts of problems. And I get to be this third voice outside their parents and their teachers, and this place of stability and inspiration for them. And then not say, well, I can only work with you for 1 year because I'm your kindergarten teacher, and then you're going to be in first grade. But, the troubles you have are going to take 6 or 7 years for us to work through. I'm here for that. And, at the other end of that trail, they become this powerful piece of our community who advocates with other kids and builds people up. And you multiply that by 200 families. That's a huge, huge, powerful structure.
Oh my
and
goodness,
in my view is my dragon's hoard. It's not the money that this place has brought in, but the people that it's built up and the relationships that have been created and the instabilities that have been overcome is where I stack it. And my wife has always seen that and said,
Mhm.
I will stomach all this financial nonsense because I see the good that's done here. So
No, that is awesome.
I think that's always been the reward of that journey. I think unlike the Appalachian Trail, there's not a pocket full of lessons. I think it's a catalog of lessons, just because it's birth and life and marriage and death and divorce. It's everything. It's, when you tie yourselves into the lives of everybody's families, you're going to run the gamut. I mean, I've been at a deathbed. I've married multiple people. I've, been at the births of the babies. It's like where you're there for the whole thing, So
Yeah, that's life at its fullest.
yeah,
And so when you named the company Unity Martial Arts, was that a vision casting through the name that you really wanted to create this community of unity?
yeah. We sat around our little house in Georgia, me and Melanie, just trying to think what we should name it. And New, which is the martial art that I teach, has a code of ethics, or 8 codes of ethics. And the third one is all Kung Fu students are unified in spirit and respect each other and their instructors, which sounds like it's about being respectful to your instructors. But the members being unified in spirit has always struck me as what's really special about what we do. If I was in another martial art, I would probably welcome at another school of that martial art in another state. If I traveled to, we Unity now teaches several martial arts in addition to Kung Fu, but all of those, if you were to go to another state, you could pop into somebody's class. They probably wouldn't charge you. They'd be happy you were there. They'd ask questions. Kung Fu, on the other hand, if I was going to another state, A, I would already know the people who were there, and B, they would ask me to stay at their house. And they would
Oh,
probably want
wow.
to show me around and take the weekend off so that we could really spend time together. So that unity of spirit to me is so special that's why I picked Unity as the name.
I see.
And so I guess you can say, yes, I knew that was the calculus.
Why is Kung Nu, am I saying that correctly?
None of us say it correctly. It's Vietnamese.
Okay. Why is that so unique or different than the other martial arts to where, like you just described, it's more welcoming in your home than just welcoming you in the workout studio?
First of all, I'm sure there are other martial arts that accomplish the same thing. Partially, it's a size issue. If you have 70,000 members, you're probably not inviting every member that visits to stay in your home. But Kung Fu is just a couple thousand people. If you have, the second thing is that the guy who created Kung Fu, he was Vietnamese, and during the Vietnam War, he had gone back to Vietnam to try to help as a college professor at the time. And he ended up being put in charge of what was sort of the Vietnamese version of the Civilian Conservation Corps. So it was like people whose homes had been destroyed. He was in charge of programming and activities for them. And so he did model a lot of it on doing public works like the Civilian Conservation Corps. But as a martial arts teacher, he also got them into, daily training and then realized the need and the power of community and leadership building in these folks that had been displaced. And so by the time he comes back from doing this work, he begins adding philosophy after philosophy after philosophy into our required learning. And the philosophies are based on building the human and the community and the teacher and the leader up to serve each other and the community. And so Kung Fu teaches punches and kicks and, stick fighting and all these different things, but also teaches philosophy and humanity and leadership and growth and challenge and development. And so I think having it, a lot of styles have maybe a code of ethics or a list of words that they think are important, but not a lot of them have open philosophical discussions. Not a lot of them have requirement to publish papers about this stuff for rank. So it's just deeper in what we're doing, that philosophical scholarly aspect.
That's cool. That's really neat. Is there anything else you want to add about Adventure 2 or?
I mean, it's like I said earlier, it's the one that doesn't have an ending yet. And so it's still just it's the work, and it's the ongoing adventure, and it still is feeding me in every possible way, but it doesn't have a tidy packaging yet.
Yeah.
So it's kind of the ongoing one. Yeah, no, Adventure 3 is a little bit more of a capsule. So Adventure 3 is, we came together as a community to buy this building that we're in. It's the first place Unity had been. We grew a lot and realized that the more we grew, the more families came through the neighborhood, the more the businesses near us did well, the higher the property value went up, the more our rent increased. So success meant more expense on our rent. And if we owned the place, that would mean success would mean growing the value of what we were doing. So we thought, well, you need to buy our own building somewhere. So we finally found the place that we wanted, finished the paperwork, and then the next year, a global pandemic shuts us all down. So as soon
Oh
as
my
we get the
goodness.
mortgage payments going, it all has to close down. And we are just pivoting and struggling and maneuvering to figure out, how do you not lose this community that you've built? How do you make it all work? How do you make these payments? What's going to happen? And so in the middle of scrambling and being crafty and figuring out about, video conferencing and small groups and doing meal drives for people who had gotten the virus and all this kind of stuff, being as careful as we could, it was December, and my friends that were doctors were getting vaccines, but we were not getting them yet. We couldn't get them. And, we're on the list. I think we were supposed to get it in March because we had a childcare license. And so childcare workers could get it. We were like third on the list. And then in January, one night I've got a little bit of a fever and I'm like, doesn't feel like a big deal, but I should get tested. And it turns out I've got COVID. And so I call in and I'm like, everybody that, was in class with me yesterday needs to go get tested, and so on and so forth. But I'm not worried about it at all because, I don't know anyone who's died from COVID at this point. I hear news reports, people are dying. But, even some old and sick people I knew had gotten sick. My uncle had gone to the hospital for it, but then had gotten right back out. So I wasn't worried. I was just like, I'm gonna be sick. I'm gonna have fever for a couple of days, and then I'm gonna get right back to it. Maybe I'll lose my sense of smell. And so, 3 or 4 days into it, it's getting worse and not better, and it's getting harder to breathe. And I'm like, still not worried, but I'm not doing well. Um, some of the doctors that I know are sending over like pulse ox things and saying, check this and let me see what it is. We'll see how you're doing. And it's getting lower and lower and lower. And they're saying, well, if it gets below 90, maybe you should go in. And it's at 91. And so I'm like, I don't know. I'm probably fine. It'll probably tomorrow will go away. And one of them finally says, you know what, at 91, like as fit as you are, that's why don't you going in? Like, that's not great. And so I go in the hospital and we spend hours in the parking lot because it's a war zone. I mean, it's like they can't have a bunch of people crammed in there. So the whole parking lot is full of people sitting in their cars with nurses going around and doing pulse oxes. And you're on a list to get in line. But if your oxygen gets low enough, they'll just bump you up in line and get you seen. The next thing I know, I'm admitted to the hospital. And now I'm hooked up to walls with medications, and I'm like, oh, this is going to knock it right out. Like, I got the good drugs going in me, and I got this oxygen pumping into my nose so I can breathe better. And it's getting worse, and it's getting worse, and it's getting worse. And we finally get to this point where the nurses come in, and I see them once a day, usually, maybe twice a day, but like they're overworked. There's a floor with, I think there were 30 rooms on the floor, and there's like 75 patients there, and they're crammed into rooms, and they're like, the nurses can't see everybody. And I'm starting to have a hard time. Like, it's getting hard to breathe. I know that day I had a coughing fit. Like, it started coughing and it had like bruised my ribs, so I had all this bruising, and I didn't break them, and she said, look, you got to beat this thing right now because we can't help you anymore here. It's from here to the ventilator. And she's like, I just got to be honest with you. If you go on the ventilator, you're probably going to die.
Grief.
So if you got any other resources to pull out, now's the time to do it. And they were not mincing words at this point.
Yeah.
And I remember thinking, like, how do you fight harder than I can't breathe? Like, what do you do more than that? And I hadn't slept in a couple days because the pain was so much. Pain's not the right word. Pain's a big word. Like, we think of pain as like a needle stabbing in us. But if you think of the pain of like being in a marathon, to the exhaustion pain, the lack of sleep, frustration, all that is pain also, right? It's your body saying things aren't well. And my lungs were so inflamed that if you imagine them, like, normally there's these healthy sacs that inflate, but they're so inflamed that they're just swollen tissue with a tiny bit of space in them. And if they moved at all, it would cause this seizing, coughing fit that would just inflame everything that much more, and just pain and suffering. And so, I remember trying to breathe like I had one of those little cocktail straws, and I would want to breathe just so little that my lungs couldn't actually totally inflate, so that they wouldn't start this coughing fit. And yet I'm asphyxiating. I'm not getting enough oxygen. So what I want more than anything is to breathe, but I can't. And because I have to monitor it at that level, I can't sleep. Right? If you go to sleep, you'll take a full breath, and suddenly there's the coughing, and then the next thing you know, I've broken my ribs and this kind of stuff. So it's torture, and somehow I made it. Over the next 6 or 8 hours, there was this battle, and then I remember she came through and she tested my pulse ox, and she said, "I think you're gonna be fine." And then the next day, they started testing me to see if they could let me go, and by the afternoon they kicked me out. And honestly, it was like, "We just need this room, man. I don't think you're going to die anymore." And the test to let me out was, could you stand up for 30 seconds without falling down? They said, if you can, we're sending you home. And I wanted to go home. I also was a little worried I was going to go home and die. I've been hooked up to IVs and oxygen and all this stuff, and you're taking it away. But there was also this part of me that could tell something had changed. Like, it had gone from getting slightly worse, slightly worse, slightly worse, to slightly better, slightly better, slightly better. So I go home and I begin what I think is going to be a couple weeks of recovering. And it was 2.5 years before I could take a breath. And so
wow,
the real adventure there, though, was not me slowly healing. It was that in the middle of the first month of being home, and my book starts in this scene, which is I'm sitting on the porch and I can't think straight. It's one of those things where when your brain is compromised, you don't really know. But the next month, that last month I was pretty compromised. And then the next month you realize I was also compromised that month, just not as much. Like, you only can tell from the outside. And so I'm laying on the porch of my house trying to get sun, and one of my doctor friends comes over and says, we're just hanging out. Nobody was doing as much because it was COVID, and the street next to my house was empty, and he just came and was sitting on the porch with me, and he mentions he's going to do this retreat that he wants to do to help with his anxiety, to try this Brazilian jungle medicine called ayahuasca. And he's like, "I'm going to go do this ayahuasca and see if they say it'll help with anxiety and all these other things." And I can tell he's really nervous about it. Like, I'm sitting here and I can barely move. I mean, at the time, like, people would call me to talk to me about stuff, and I would turn the phone on and I'm just laying on my shoulder on speaker because I couldn't actually use my muscles to hold it up. And then if they asked me questions, I would hang up on them because I just didn't have the energy to think about the relationship I had with that person and manage my responses and figure out or think about responses. I just couldn't. I didn't realize that was a hard thing until I had no energy. And so I'm sitting there in this state listening to my friend, and I can tell he's scared. He's about to do something that scares the hell out of him. And there's this little voice in me that's just like, "Go, you got to go." And so I said, "I'll go with you." And, he's kind of floored by it and tells me, "Wow, let me give you all the information. Like, you should know what we're talking about, because this is the first time I've heard this word." And so, I watch a Netflix special and I read some articles, and it's crazy. It's going and hallucinating and maybe dying, and certainly thinking you're dying and throwing up everywhere, maybe pooping your pants, and but again, this is why I call this my third adventure. This is not the easy path. And again, like the others, I think it's critical that it was at a point of break. Like a version of me had died. And I really came to this over the course of this adventure, but I was redefining myself. I needed to transform again. It was sort of like I was wrapped in this cocoon, and whether I knew it or not, the next step was breaking out of this cocoon. If I sat there any longer, I was going to atrophy in it. And so we go, and it's exhausting, and there's vomiting, and it's confusing. And I come home and I'm just like, well, that sucked. But my friend gets a lot out of it, right? A lot of his anxiety goes away. For me, I tried the first night that we did it 3 times the weekend we were there. The first night, thrown up, confusing, dark shapes moving around. Thought I saw some things, was pretty clearly aware that like I could have just made stuff up because I needed to see something. The next morning I wake up, we have to do it again. So I decided to drink more because I was like, maybe I just didn't have enough. I felt like I was in this liminal space. I drank more, and then I find myself transported to some place that's like pink and white and comfortable and warm, and realize over the course of 30 minutes or so that I'm inside of a womb with a baby that's like a brand new baby, just a few weeks old. And as I'm looking at it and can kind of tell what's going on around it, I realize, oh, this is my friends. They just told me they were pregnant a few weeks ago. Like, this is their brand new baby, and that I kind of can talk to it and work with it. And
That's
so I
wild.
just, a few hours just kind of going through what life was going to be like, and straightening some things out that were crooked, and seeing some things where like, ooh, this is going to be a hard thing in your life, but I'm going to leave it here because it's going to define you. So I don't, I have to. That's going to hurt, but you need that one. And I come out of this and it's delightful, but I'm like, okay, that was super weird.
Yeah. What did you do for you?
Just, I don't know. At the time I remember thinking that was definitely something. Last night was not something. That was something. But I don't know what it has to do with me.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right? I was, I care about these people and their kid, but I wasn't thinking about it. I wasn't stressing about it. I wasn't, they're happy, healthy folks. They're going to do a good job with this kid. I'm not worried about him at all. Then the next night I've got to do it again. And again, it's just dark shapes and discomfort and nausea and vomiting. And I'm like, you know what? I'm exhausted now. I haven't slept in 2 nights. Take me home. But like I said, my friend comes out of it and he's feeling better than he has in years. He's like speaking up for himself, having less fear. So he wants to do it again. Like, I don't want to do it again. But I discovered that it's really good for PTSD. And my dad, who's lived his whole life with PTSD, is a veteran, and they said they would pay for veterans to come do this. So I arranged for him to go. So my buddy has gone a few times now, flash forward almost a year. He's gone a couple of times. My dad's gone. My dad has kind of mixed results like I did. My buddy keeps having positive results. But at one point, he says he did too much. And he crossed over to some other place where there was intelligence that scared the hell out of him. And it was just laughing at him, at how small and insignificant. And, I don't want to say too much about his thing because it's his story to tell. But the quote that stuck with me was that he, with his very insecure self, was in the presence of this greater intelligence that said, hey, we think you're hilarious. And he was just like, oh, thanks. Like, I think of myself as funny, but I never know if other people think I'm funny. And they said, no, we think it's hilarious that you think any of this matters, which just made his ego collapse and terrified him. And so he came back being like, I don't know if I can keep doing this. It's scary. But I hear this and I'm like, I want to talk to them. Like, that's what I was there for. I want to speak to whoever's on the other side of that veil. So I consent to go back again, but I decide at this point, I'm going to take this much more seriously. I'm going to be much more ready. I'm going to go much deeper. In the midst of all this, my main teacher has now died of COVID. He, again, super fit guy, and it just took him out. And so I have been trying to heal now for almost a year, and I can't take a full breath, and I can't run, and I can't do karate. I'm like trying to find other ways to get better. my nerves are shot. I can't take a breath. Like all things are just, it's a mess. So I'm really looking for healing. I'm looking for change. I'm looking to figure out, who am I? If this is my body now, what does that mean for me, and who am I? So I go
Like
back.
almost an identity crisis of
Absolutely an
if not
identity
who I
crisis.
used to be, but what's
Exactly.
left.
Well, and it was like, I know I'm who I used to be, but I don't have any other resources to do the thing that I'm good at.
I see. Yeah.
Right. So I go again, and this time I'm there specifically channeling my teacher who's just died, because he gives me energy, right? And also my grandmother, who'd been dead for decades, because she's the only person I've ever seen miraculously heal someone. And so, because of this woman, I have a belief in miraculous healing. I've just never seen anyone else do it. I don't have a belief that it's accessible, but I have a belief that it exists. Because I remember watching, and I don't know if you know this through your family connections, but one of my cousins in college, her boyfriend was shot in a hunting accident
Oh
with a
wow.
shotgun at nearly point blank range, and just destroyed most of his abdomen. And my family gathers around, and my grandmother's there, and aunts are there, and folks are there, and they're all in a circle praying for this guy. And the doctors are like, he might live to the morning, but that's, you should go say goodbye to him. But they're just praying away. And then an hour later they call and they say, I think he might survive actually, but he's probably not going to leave these machines. And then an hour later it was like, okay, he's definitely going to survive, but he's going to have a colostomy bag and he's going to have all these surgeries. And then by 4 hours of praying later, I think he's just gonna be fine. I think he's gonna have a bladder the size of a walnut, but I think he's gonna be fine. And through this whole experience, I see all my aunts and cousins all like praying furiously and talking and talking and talking in a way that has always made me a little uncomfortable. But I see my grandmother just silently with her head down, and she's glowing. There's this slight orange glow to her. And throughout my life, I remember thinking, she saved him. I don't know how, because all of my aunts and uncles talk about all this the same way my grandmother did, but my grandmother was the one who did that. I could see it. I could
Mm.
physically see it. And so I decided I needed to bring her in with me. And I went back and I basically just drank twice as much. This time I'm really, really focused on how I'm going to do this. And I've talked more and I've read more, and I know you can't open your eyes, because your senses, the chemicals in this heighten all your senses. And if you open your eyes, you start calculating what's going on around you. You can't do that. You just got to stay in it, and to not try to control it too much. And so I just go there with her and my teacher as my focus, but also just ready to let it happen and surrender into it. And sure enough, I had this absolutely transcendent experience where I kind of saw everything. I saw life and death, how it all works, what makes us important, what makes us special, what my place in the world is, how it all works, was all revealed to me. And at the end of all that, I was like, okay, cool. Can I breathe, please? This is all great information, but I would like to heal. And my grandmother is there. And I realized she's the one showing me all this. She's sitting there showing me how it works. And I, and I, and I, she's not saying anything. She's just sort of allowing me access. And so I try to use this fountain of energy that's pouring through me into the world to heal myself. And it feels great, but then it just sort of like spirals away to help someone else. And I try again, and it's building up in me, and it feels like it has the power to heal me, but it spirals away to help someone else. And by the third time I try this, and I'm at this point existing in this out of body fountain of energy that's really overwhelming, sensually overwhelming, like just vibration everywhere. And it all just stops, just dead stops. I'm just in a quiet, cold, dark place with my grandmother standing there, and she says, "What are you doing?" Which is the first thing she's actually said to me in all this. And I was like, I'm trying to heal myself. You're showing me all this power. I'm here to be healed. I'm trying to use it to heal myself. Please help me. And she says, that's not what it does. I've shown you what it does. Like I'm showing you all this so that you understand who you are. I'm not trying to teach you a magic power. I just want you to see who you are in the world. And I start weeping, and I'm like, I just like, how do I continue to be myself without my health? My health is part of how I do this. And she says, you have to stop trying to you just have to stop trying to think of yourself as someone who got sick, who is trying to get better. Like, you got to stop trying to recover that person that you were. And I'm just, like, what am I doing here if I'm not trying to heal? And she says, you're not a person who's trying to recover from COVID. You're a person who died of COVID. And she's like, you need to let that sink in, and you need to really mourn that. You need to really let go. And then she reframed the last year and showed me, like, in this year, you were born again. You learn to walk, you learn to run, you learn to swim. You've had to build everything from scratch. And so you got to stop comparing all that to this guy who was before and start being proud of who you are on this new journey. It's amazing. Like, stop belittling it. And I just wept for hours. And by the time I came out of that, I was like, well, I feel really good about myself now. I still can't do karate, but like, I'm pretty excited about what I'm doing and where I'm going. And like, it all feels good to me. Like, I don't know what this means for my next test that I have to take, where I have to do better than I did last time and show all these increases. And then this, this sequence of events began right at that night, starting with, that was the first of 3 times we were supposed to drink the stuff that weekend. And when I woke up in the morning, I was so sick to, like, the idea of drinking it again made me just physically ill. Like, I couldn't even imagine getting the stuff near my mouth. I just would start to gag just to think about it. There was no way I was going to be able to put a cup of this gross stuff into my mouth. I would just spit it right out. And I told the people there, I was like, I just had one of the most transformative experiences of my life, and you guys want to give me 2 more of those, and how could I not want that? And I don't think I can. Like, I'm just going to throw it up. And we had a lot of conversations about it. And finally, one of the guys there said, look, I think you're being told not to drink, so just don't drink. And I decided I'd just get a good night's sleep that night. And I went, and as I lay there trying to sleep, it was in a lot of pain. My hips were hurting, and I had this terrible headache. And I remembered that the night before, when I had drank the stuff, had similar pain, and there was this moment when I left my body, and I realized that the pain was just all in the body, but that I was not my body, and that I don't have to feel that pain. And it was all pretty fresh. And so I was like, I wonder if I can just get to that. And so I put myself in the position that I had been lying in the night before, and started just kind of going through the rote physical part of it, the breathing the way I was breathing. And suddenly I fell back out of my body again, having not drank the stuff. And my grandmother was there again. And she said, let's talk about truth. And begins breaking down for me this existence of truth and illusion in the world that is now the way that I evaluate almost everything. And the basics of it were that, and this, I think this is really central to certainly how I see what you're talking about as adventure. So that there's only 2 true things that you ever do in the world. And they're not single acts, they're categorical acts. And the 2 categories that really matter, the 2 things that are true, are anything that helps you understand that you are profoundly sacred and loved and lucky to be here now doing whatever you're doing. Anything that does that. And the second true act is anything you can do that passes that on to another person. And everything else is illusion. And the way she defined illusion was, we know when the truth comes, and you can always you can always feel it pass, but for the most part, we don't act on it, right? And you can only be aware of the presence of the truth when you're in the moment. So if you are thinking about the past, worrying about the future, you can't actually be aware of the truth when it comes by, right? You're not accessible to it. But if you are in that moment, you will hear this little voice say, now. It's the only thing it ever says is now. And in that moment, you will always have the reaction, this is a terrible idea, right? I don't have time. I don't have energy. I don't have money. I don't have what it takes to do this. Also, I will probably be punished for what you're asking me to do. Something's going to go wrong. I'm going to be misinterpreted. This person will fear me. But what you're hearing is a moment where your specific ability to provide a knowledge of love can interact with another person's specific need for it at that moment. And when you just say, all right, I'm going in, something happens that becomes one of the experiences of your life. And when you pass it up, it lingers like this thorn of something that you know is important.
Just feeling of missing it, like you let something pass that was necessary.
You let it pass. And so what you do is, and this is 99% of human experience, what you do is you try to recreate it in a safe way, right? You felt that need, but you go, you know what I could do? I could start volunteering, because I feel this need. I feel that there's a desire. And so I'm going to go volunteer, and I'm going to find a place that matches my schedule, right? And maybe with some friends that'll go with me, and you make it safer and safer and safer. It's not evil.
Mm-hmm.
But the problem is that when you get to where you satisfy what you thought was your search for the truth, it's not there. And you can't figure out why. You're like, I did good stuff. It wasn't a waste of time. Lives were saved, people were helped, whatever, but I didn't find the truth there, because the truth was not in the 200 volunteers that you helped over the course, or the 200, like, let's say, homeless people that you served over the course of the next 2 years. The truth was actually in that moment at the coffee shop when you were like, I can't do that right now. But you heard it say now, and you passed it by. And in that one moment was the actual truth. And everything since then has been an attempt to recreate it in safety. And so you start to see this breakdown over time of answering the call to the truth means not being safe. It means risk taking, and it means sacrifice, but also it means really, really feeling alive and fulfilled, because success or failure is not part of the truth. Success or failure, it goes both ways, right? Sometimes you put yourself out there and it seems like it went not at all how you wanted it to go. And yet it still is one of those memorable times when you realize, I answered the call, right? I fought the fight. We didn't win the fight, but it was important. And it was part of my true essential self. So that breakdown has been really a powerful one for me. And I really think it speaks to why adventure is what it is. And when I said earlier, the ascetic's life, it comes directly from me asking my grandmother, how many of these do we get? Like, how many times do you experience the truth? And how many have I missed? And her saying, there's no punishment for missing any of them, right? It is the actual reason that we live is to experience this truth, right? But you're not bound to do them all. There's no punishment for failing. It's just why we're here. Like, we exist to fill ourselves up with love and generosity, and then to act fearlessly to pass that on. Those are the two things that stitch this spiritual being into this physical reality. And everything else is illusion that we make up to help ourselves feel safe, that without any evil in it leaves us feeling hollow. Right? We have the grand success that we spent 10 years orchestrating, and the next day we don't know why we don't feel like we've conquered the world. Like, I just succeeded in everything. Why am I still empty? And the emptiness is because you're not in the moment, right? You're still way back in the past regretting that you didn't do that thing in that one moment, right?
Mm-hmm.
But the path of the ascetic, not the aesthetic, but the path of the ascetic is, I have nothing, no relationship, no resource, no saving of any kind, no possession of any kind, so that every single moment that I exist is an act of courage. Right?
Mm.
It's all a risky, in the moment, like, what am I going to eat tonight? Am I going to eat tonight? If I eat tonight, it will be because grace came upon me in some way, because I have no food, right? If I sleep in a cave or in a bed or in a tent or on the sand, that's part of my adventure in this moment. And as she's showing me this, it's every holy person from every tradition I've ever heard of. And I asked my grandmother, like, is that what I'm supposed to be doing? To which she laughs and says, Melanie would kill you. Are you kidding? You're married. You have relationships. That's not your path. That's not what you're doing this time around. But that would be everything. That would be 100%. Right. And so, I carry this back into the world with me, along with several other revelations. Like, there are, there's not good and evil. There's only love and fear, to which we argued about for some time. And I found it interesting that I was allowed to argue and talk about the presence of evil, and her just sort of breaking it down. Like, sometimes it's very complicated, but there's still not an evil thing. There's just fear. And fear is everything from the denial of the truth to, genocide. But it all is some orchestration of fear.
So, this is certainly not the direction that many of the conversations that I have on this podcast go in. But what you're describing, I've heard other people speak of the power of now, the power of awareness in the moment, of detaching from future and past, as maybe one of the most powerful things that is available to the human being. And, some talk of it healing from pain or healing from trauma in a way that medication, therapy, doctors, they tried all the things, none of that worked. But being able to get very, very deep into the current moment allowed for that kind of transformation. And, the ayahuasca is, there's, you had likely, you don't have to give the details, and I'm not asking that, but many times these retreats are not in the United States because it's still not an acceptable thing to do in many locales. But there, at the same time, there's a lot of research being funded by the federal government, being funded by private institutions, that is going into what this drug as a medication in the proper setting with the proper support can do to change people's lives in a way that it's very difficult. And in fact, I've heard people say you can't get it any other place. You actually said something I've never heard before in this context of, you got it with ayahuasca, but then you also were able to reach that again without it.
Yeah. Yeah.
So let me try to tie it back in. Well, you've tied it into the adventure, but let me try to put a bow on this and say, what does that, for Tanner at this point in your life, with a family and a business and the experiences behind you, and knowing that all of these adventures have built upon themselves, and the one before gave you the foundation to do the one next, what is this adventure number 3 prepare you to do next? What do you think next looks like for adventure for you?
Honestly, it's a little terrifying, which makes me think it might be real. It's like you said, the country is at a reckoning point with the fact that we have decades and decades of research that shows that these entheogens have an effect on depression, trauma, a whole list of issues that we spend billions of dollars trying to address fairly poorly, they have a powerful effect almost immediately on. I think that the legality issue is going to change. There are some political issues with it. One of the reasons is these drugs were originally banned in the 70s was not just because Timothy Leary went out and started giving it to everybody and some people died. You still can show that the best medications we have in the world right now that are the most successful as cancer drugs or whatever, if you take them wrong in the wrong place, you're going to die. Like any medication
no different.
you take wrong, it'll kill you. You have to do it correctly in the right place. But one of the problems with it is that it is a medication that gets rid of fear. It gets rid of fear. It gets rid of the feeling that you're not connected to everyone else. It gets rid of, your desire to hurt or be angry. And so a population that is less fearful, more loving, more connected, cares about everybody, doesn't buy as much stuff, doesn't want to go to war, doesn't, want to hate. And so there's a political force that's not terribly interested in making sure that this is available on a broad spectrum, because fear makes a lot of money. So I think that we're on the path towards legalizing a lot of this in certain settings, but I think it's going to be on the down low for a while. The medicines that are part of ancient traditions have been done this way for thousands and thousands of years. Some people would say 20 or 30,000 years.
And ayahuasca fits that bill, correct?
Yes. Yeah. I mean, this goes back into records that, we don't have written records of when this happened, but they've been doing it in the Amazon for, as long as they've been down there, as far as we can tell. And so the religious exemption is the way that places are trying to get around it, is saying this is part of a religious practice. You can't deny people their freedom of religion. Therefore, they should be allowed to take mescaline, which is the peyote, and if you're a part of this Native American tradition. That then opens the door to me saying, oh, I also believe in that religion, so that I would like this healing as well. That's been the doorway that they've been trying to use. And so,
well, I think it's still fair to say also that if you set the legal or not legal issue aside, these are very powerful drugs that need both set and setting to be appropriate. Otherwise, it is very dangerous. And there are documented cases of the set and setting not being there, someone taking it, and very bad outcomes occurring.
Yeah.
So I think that's a good thing to highlight, and at the same time, it's very difficult to dispute the general outcomes that you see written in well documented academic research around this stuff, but also anecdotal stories from individuals like what you're describing. Your story can't be taken from you. That was your experience, and it seems to have changed your life in a lot of ways.
No, absolutely. Well, and the capstone to it, because again, I was, after that experience, which went on for months, by the way, being able to connect to that energetic source, and it sort of diminished over a while, but I can still do it on some level. I went back several more times after that, and each time became this conversation with this intelligence that would show me things I had never heard before, explain things to me that I didn't understand. So it became very interesting to commune with it, because I was always having this dialogue in the back of my head, like, this is just happening in my own mind, right? Like, are these just things that I know that I don't know that I know? But I kept being confronted with feeling very strongly that things were one way, and having this entity laugh at me and say, really, you think it's like that? Let me show you the truth, and then that'll change your life and the way you talk about everything from now on. And that just doesn't feel like it's coming from me. That feels very much like something else was communicating to me through this. So that was a fairly powerful idea, and everything that came from it kept healing people.
Do you think this is? No, go ahead and finish your thought.
The final time that I went, I still couldn't breathe. I still couldn't take a full breath, and this is 2.5 years in. And I'd finally seen a pulmonologist. It was kind of hard to see a pulmonologist during COVID. They were busy. And especially when my complaint was I can't do karate as well as I used to, I was not high on the list. And so when I finally got in to see a pulmonologist and was saying, I have about 80%, I can take 80% of one breath. And they were saying, we don't really treat people for 80% of a breath. Like, as far as we're concerned, that's fine. And I was saying, you need to treat me like a professional athlete. I need to be able to do 100% of a breath. And so they measured everything about my lungs, lung capacity, and how much oxygen was transferring, and said, you're at 140% of anyone we've ever measured on this machine. Your lungs are so good. And I said, why would I not be able to take a breath? Like, I've been using these lungs hard for the last 50 years. Mm-hmm. I know exactly how much air I'm getting, and it's 80%. And they said, we think you have PTSD from being in the hospital. And as I really examined that, I started realizing they were right. That it wasn't that I was not able to take that breath. It was that panic attacks would set in as my breathing was challenged in any way.
Wow. And
so I thought, all right, this stuff is for PTSD. I've just never asked it to help that. And so I the last time I went back specifically to see if I could do that. There is a path of, I'm trying to remember what it's called. Is it EMDR? Is that the light? Like, it's a therapy where you're
like a bilateral stimulation.
Right. And so this was what they wanted me to do. And I looked into it, and it's, it can be years of expensive therapy. And I was like, let me try this thing that I already am in the middle of and see if it can address it first. And so, I went back again, just like, okay, we're going to go back. And I had heard from, and at this point I'd had a PTSD experience under ayahuasca once that matched what I'd heard from some veterans who had done it, which is essentially it takes you back to the traumatic incident and lets you take an outside perspective on it and really look at all the factors and all the people and pull people out and have conversations with them. And during my third trip there, one of the things that had come up was a feeling of unworthiness, sort of an imposter syndrome. A lot of people deal with this feeling that, like, I don't deserve the things that I have, or, and so I had specifically asked about that. And by the way, when I'm talking about asking this person, this is a very feminine entity that is not a person that's there, right? This is something that's happening
more energy than
inside elsewhere, but it's a very clear presence. It's not like a vague voice. It started out as my grandmother, and then the second time I went, just kind of said, I was just we were getting to know each other. So I sort of wore your grandmother for that moment. And so when I asked her about unworthiness, she took me back to this childhood experience, and we unpacked it. And I have not felt that way from that moment on. That wow. Completely went away 100% after 2 hours of drinking this medicine and having a conversation. And so I kind of knew that was the framework, and thought, okay, so I'm going to unpack the hospital. And the more I thought about it, the more I realized it was unbelievably traumatic. And, there was a lot of rough stuff while I was in there. And I thought, okay, it makes sense. And I meditated on it for months, getting myself ready. And it's like, we're going to knock this thing out. We're going to get there. I'm going to ask her about it. She's going to take me back there. We're going to unpack it. And I've got 3 chances this weekend to do this process. And I get there in the first night, I drink the stuff, I go through the vomiting, I get to the place, she's there, she's just looking at me. And I say, I'm ready, let's go. And she's like, you're ready for what? And I'm like, please don't make me work for this. Like, I'm ready to go back into the hospital and unpack all this so I don't have this PTSD and I can breathe again. And she just stares at me and just says, no, we're not going to do that. And I'm just like, you're killing me here. Like, it's been like 6 or 7 months of build up to this, of me focusing on this thing. I know it's going to be traumatic. I just want to get through it. Can I just ride this roller coaster? And she goes, that was the worst, most painful thing you've ever been through. That was the most trauma you've ever suffered. She's like, but you kind of won. I mean, you're not really afraid of that. You're people that you consider better than you died from that, and you didn't. Like, you're fine. You're not really afraid of the hospital. And I was just like, why can't I breathe? Like, can you please get to the bottom of why I can't breathe? And she says, you can't breathe because you haven't let go of all the people who thought it made sense that you would be the one to get sick and die. And
Whoa.
I'm just like searching my mind going, I have no idea who you're talking about. Like I cannot think of a single person. Like in my doctor's office uses me as the cautionary tale of like, you better take care of yourself. Is like, this guy was super healthy and COVID almost killed him. Like I can't think of anybody who thought I was weak and I should die. And she like does that thing where she's looking at you and she's like, you ready to do this? And I'm like, oh no, come on. Like, what are we about to have a jump scare? Like, I don't know what you're doing. And here comes my grandfather, dead 25 years. And she's like, he doesn't think you're strong enough. And I end up having to argue with him over my existence because I was not the man that he wanted me to be. I didn't go to his church. I didn't play football. I didn't join the army. I didn't do all the things that he valued men doing.
Mm-hmm.
And the stuff I did didn't make any sense to him. And we argued about it for a while. And I realized after a while, like, why are we arguing about this? Like, you think one thing and I think another, but I value myself. Like, I see the value in what I do. It's powerful. And it's more powerful than anything you ever did. Why am I arguing this with this old man? And so I finally just said, hey, look, I forgive you for not seeing me. I forgive you for not understanding, but I'm really powerful and I can do this. And he just slowly disappeared. And then like up comes my other grandfather. We like have this battle again. And then the final one is, here comes my teacher. And I was just like, seriously? Like, you died from this thing. Like, what are you even talking about? And he starts crying, saying it's not fair. I'm stronger. I'm good. I'm powerful. And I said, look, I forgive you for everything, for not seeing this, for not, anything you might have thought about me. But I've got it from here. I can do this. And I have not had trouble breathing ever since that moment.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah.
That's an incredible story. And I hear, or I've read of things where there's this brain connection to the body that overrides the true state of the body.
Yeah.
And so, that's fascinating to me.
Yeah.
We've got a couple minutes here before I jump to the next interview that I've got scheduled.
Yeah.
I think the real question I'm super curious about is, what does this mean for you? What is Adventure 4.0? Is it just living into the unknown, or do you have a clear idea of what that looks like?
So the thing that I would say is that I feel like these 3 adventures all were defining acts predicated upon the death of myself.
Yeah.
At the end of one type of being and the beginning of another. And so these adventures define us for ourselves by showing us what our powers are moving forward as we rebuild our lives. Like, an adventure has no place in the middle of something that you're doing, right? An adventure is how you define moving forward the new setting of what you have to work with. And it's essentially you gathering your tools. What are my tools now? Because I died. I don't know what they are, right? That former self is not what we're dealing with. Who am I now? Me hiking Appalachian Trail is me saying, I am no longer a child. I have to be a grown man now. And I don't know what that means in the world. What are my real tools and who am I really? And let me put these up against the fire. Let me do something really hard with them to see if they really work. My starting Unity is not me saying, this would be fun. It's me saying, I tried being an adult working in the world and the world fell apart. And that whole type of career fell apart and the country fell apart. Who am I now? Like, now I'm not just an adult. Now I am a person who creates and builds. What am I going to create and build? Yeah. Who am I and what tools do I have and what works well and what doesn't? And then my healing was, I thought I was this super physical martial artist who could do anything and was going to inspire everybody with the way I move my body. If you knock that out of me and say, maybe you don't have that, maybe you're just a guy who is connected to all these people and helps them in all these ways, but now I doubt all of it. Now I need to put it against the fire again and say, what's real? Like, the reason for the adventure is the beginning of doubt. Like, I don't know I don't know where the ground level is, and I don't know what of my powers are just whimsy or rumor, and which ones are real, which ones are solid. And so the fire will tell you. Right? You put yourself up against the fire and find out. The dragon will tell you which sword is plastic and which one is real.
Yeah.
So unless
and you don't get that unless you do the scary thing, unless you push into
you
it.
got to face it's only in the middle of that battle do you find out what's real and what works.
Yeah.
And so as far as Adventure 4.0, the question is, at what point does the bottom fall out and you realize, whoa, like we're on unsteady ground again? At that point, some adventure presents itself, whether it falls on you like a disease that takes your breath away, or like an event that shakes up your ability to do the job that you thought you were supposed to do, or if it's just an uneasiness that tells you like you better go do something to figure out who you are. And all of these were the work of years. They were never the work of a weekend, because the work of a weekend will just give you a glimpse from the mountaintop and then make you try to recreate it from the bottom, and oftentimes we can't hold on to it that long.
Super interesting story, Tanner. You've been really kind to spend as much time and be as vulnerable with the details of your life. You certainly didn't know any of that to anybody, but I see the power in sharing that also with someone else that may be searching for similar things of who they are and what they need moving forward. So tell us the name of your 2 books and where people can buy them. And then if you're online anywhere, social media or anything like that, is there a way for people to connect with you?
Yeah. So the End to Ending is the Appalachian Trail book. And the current working title, like I said, the book about healing with ayahuasca is in its
Oh, that's right.
draft,
You haven't finished it yet.
But the current working title is End to Beginning.
Oh, cool.
So and I'm sure it'll be available in those same ways. Yeah, I can be connected with on social media, just Tanner Critz on Facebook or Instagram, but also just emails. My email is tannercritz@gmail.com.
All right, cool.
And I recognize that these stories connect to people, and as I mentioned, and I feel like that connection is why we're here. So I'm always happy to connect.
That's awesome. Well, thank you very much. And
yeah.
we'll check in at some point and get an update from you, but I really appreciate it.
Absolutely. Thanks a lot, Josh.
All right. I'll talk to you soon.
All right. Take care.
All right. Bye-bye. Thanks for listening to another episode of the On Adventure podcast. Be on the lookout for another episode dropping in a couple weeks. And be sure to go to our YouTube page and subscribe and follow us there, as well as on all the socials from Facebook to Instagram and LinkedIn. Until our next episode, I hope you stay safe and stay on adventure.